Well, actually, in terms of the other side, the excess and the double burden of malnutrition, I think we are already seeing the beginnings of that in the urban areas in India too, in terms of the junk food has entered the market, and urban school children and the middle class, being more open to these kind of foods. And so I think that's something like, I mean, we are facing both. On one side, we have this huge population of hungry and malnourished, where the problem is one of access. But the manifestations of the problem of excess and obesity and related issues are also surfacing. The implications of globalization, opening up of the market, is also like these foods are also finding their way even to rural areas at a faster pace, the smaller towns. And so people who rise up from a very low level of income and suddenly are, when they rise up, their access to these kind of foods is also more easier these days than before. So unless there is more of awareness generation on the right kind of food to consume, we're going to have problems. In terms of the work we do, actually, it is at one level research in terms of mapping the food security situation in the country based on secondary level data, looking at the availability situation, the access in terms of purchasing power with the people, the poverty levels, the vulnerability levels, like women within a household. Women are generally more vulnerable in terms of food security. The more backward communities have problems of access to tribal communities. And then the absorption aspect in terms of the outcome of what you consume, so the high levels of stunting and wasting. So looking at that, we try to map the relative position of the different states in the country, and then at the advocacy level, try to voice what needs to be done at the ground level and in terms of state and policy support. Then coming down to actually setting up some models at the field level to address the local level food security, ensure that. So we start by addressing the problem of transient hunger in pockets where it exists. Like there are certain areas where 4 or 5 months of the year people don't get work and they don't get anything to eat. And so start a decentralized mechanism of storage and management of food grains at the village level through community food grain banks. So that becomes an entry point to address transient hunger, and then you start working with the community on their livelihoods to improve their income generation, start looking at the nutrition angle, how to, like once the transient hunger is addressed, how to look at balanced diet and consumption, so kitchen gardens, promoting better income levels, etc. And so it becomes, try to integrate into a holistic perspective. And then working with the community, the challenge is also to build their capacity that once we withdraw, they should be able to sustain it. So those are the two arms. It's tough. Like there are certain positive pockets where it's happening. There is a very positive picture. But across the board, if you see, there are immense problems. And in terms of primary education and basic health care, I think as a country we have like kind of fallen behind. If we had done better on those fronts, India would definitely be far better off today than the state we are in. So because people need to, basic literacy can really make a difference in terms of how people make their own decisions, whereas here we still have a long way to go. The Green Revolution was basically a technology which brought in the hybrid rice and hybrid wheat and led to this quantum jump in production and productivity. But during the early years of the Green Revolution itself, Professor Swaminathan had warned that one should not, go in for excessive exploitation of the soil, charmed by this quantum leap in productivity that is possible. So there are the limitations to the environment, the soil yielding capacity, so it has to be done within limits. So the evergreen revolution is an aspect like based on balanced utilization of the natural resources available to ensure sustainable production in perpetuity. So that's the canvas one is looking at. It has to be something which will sustain, because now the problem we are facing is the green revolution areas in the northwestern parts of India. There's problem of groundwater depletion, there's problem of soil, increasing soil salinization, and production levels are falling. So the challenge is to have a more balanced approach. The evergreen revolution, again, one is it needs to be able to address the needs across the board. Like green revolution has been primarily confined to irrigated areas, but if you want the whole population to be able to access the benefits, the rain-fed farming areas, the dry areas, so according to the agroclimatic zones, the regions, the strategies have to be in place. And coupled with that, we have the increasing problems of, on one level, the globalization and the opening up of the market, the challenge of brought in by that. And the other is the natural forces in terms of global warming, sea level rise. So how to counter those? So again, according to the area one is in, if you're working in coastal areas, look, the sea level rise problem, the drought problem in the arid areas, I think those will have to be built in, and one will have to work on the vulnerability, understanding the vulnerability and enhancing the adaptability capacity of the communities to cope with these changes, which is where modern information communication technology, in terms of providing need-based information and awareness, generating awareness among the people, will have a major role to play. I mean, one can already see the early manifestations of these in terms of sea level rise, and especially, I mean, okay, partly due to the natural disasters and the when we had the tsunami, for instance, it was very visible where the vegetation cover was thick. The impact of the tsunami was much less than in areas where the forest cover was, there were degraded forests. So in terms of the strategies to be adopted, I think we already have the signals and the directions in which we need to work. See, at one level, the bureaucracy, yes, in terms of, I did mention, we have these, vertically structured departments, different programs being implemented. That is a hindrance. But in terms of opening up to the market, I think that also one needs to have a balanced approach. Like what Greenspan would voice is the total World Bank, IMF, pro-liberalization, opening up market approach. But we are in a situation where the state still needs to play a major role, where the majority are, do not have the basic access to basic amenities of life. So the state needs to play a role and in protecting the small farmer. The small farmer is also the, like farming community also constitutes the consumer community. And agriculture in the developed world is a highly protected area, whereas our farmers are just being thrown open to the wolves without any kind of support or protection. So what Professor Swaminathan often says, you need to provide them with life-saving support, like the essential commodities, provide the necessary support for that. So the state definitely has a major role to play. And in fact, one could say that post-90s, once this reform and neoliberal regime has begun, agriculture, investment in agriculture, capital formation has been falling, and that could be one of the reasons, is one of the reasons for the crisis that we are facing today in terms of falling rates of production and the farmer suicides that are happening. China, if you mentioned China, now China, again, that's a totally different model in terms of total state control, but their focus has been on, like, they have paid attention to agriculture and to primary healthcare and education, which is, I think, one plank on which they are one step above us, and also shifting population from the farm to non-farm occupations. They might have done in a very militaristic manner, but we need to look at those kinds of options on how to generate more of off-farm employment opportunities in rural areas for people to take up. So it has to be a balanced approach, cannot be a totally market driven approaches yet. Well, I think definitely that we have a free society is definitely a big positive. Like I'd gone to visited Africa last year, and some of the areas where there is so much of, people can't just even move around freely, or the kind of limitations that are there, which we don't have in India, in spite of the high levels of poverty prevailing. In fact, I think the term was first used in by the IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute. They've come out with a publication titled Double Burden of Malnutrition in the World. And in the Indian context, it is like having this huge population of malnourished due to problems of hunger, chronic hunger and hidden hunger. And on the other hand, also a small percentage which has access, in terms of incomes and purchasing power, but is now facing the problems of obesity and the related, sicknesses which come with it, like diabetes, etc., which were discussed today. And also the poorer population, when they get, an opportunity to better access, sudden consumption at higher levels is also creating problems. So it's kind of still the very early stages, but we are facing problems on the other front as well. I think broadly it's it's given me a broader perspective in terms of the issues involved on both sides, the access and the excess, and in terms of low-cost technologies for addressing these problems, which could be trained to the people. I think that's one of the keys to enabling people who are deprived of the basic amenities to be able to get better access to that, and that's something we need to work on. So it has to be like whatever we recommend, it should be, the people should be able to take it on and work on. And so that came across in the pre-tea session, and post-tea in terms of the problems that we could face as we climb the ladders of development, I think.